The history of Black Iranians goes back thousands of years. And over these thousands of years, these people made thousands of contributions to the country. There are so many Black people in Iran that it's not even known when they first got there and how many there are. Estimates even give 10% of the population. The Kushites of Sudan and Egypt called the Persians or the Iranians Parsa, while the Iranians called the Nubians or the Kushites Kusu, clearly utilizing local names. It is actually at this time that we see the original Black people from Africa migrating to Iran at a very early age. It is possible that they had migrated even earlier, but documents go dry for this type of migration. Although the Persians and the Kushites were definite enemies in the beginning, as time goes on, they became great trade partners, to the point that even some of the greatest trade goods from Kush would go against or circumvent Egypt and land directly in Persia. Persia, then again, played a much stronger role in Africa. As we can see, DNA was found in parts of the Swahili coast. It seems that the Persians took great interest in the people who were from the African continent in a way that most Middle Easterners did not. So much so that there is more writing about Black Africans that is still dominating the texts of the ancients than any other place in the Middle East. This is partially due to a lot of Persians being the scholarly class of a lot of Middle East, but it is mainly due to the fact that they had great interest inside of Africa. But not only do they give us the interest of Africa, they also tell us about the contributions that Africans had within their society. For example, within their music. So I did mention Czar. Czar played a huge contribution in the popular music of Iran, even in our modern world. According to Dr. Bita Bagaluzadeh, who is a PhD historian from the University of Pennsylvania, the contributions of Black Iranians actually goes pretty far back. And she notices that it is kind of known in Iran that one popular music that they have, traditional popular music that they have, has African contributions and it is known. She even wrote a blog or article about the contributions beyond this music. So a lot of people, they say, okay, the three things that Africans are known for in Iran: slavery, music, and a few popular people. Of course, slavery is nothing to be proud of. And of course, music is not our only contribution. And it seems to be the one thing that people take. Like I mentioned, in the Middle East, we contributed to their music, adding the hard drum, the African drum. And to this music, too, we add giant rhythms. But these two things that are stereotypically associated with Africa still need to be addressed, as they did contribute to Africans and what Africans did in certain places. Now, I mentioned that the Moorish music that ended up inside of Europe, both in places like England and also places like the Iberian areas, have easily been traced to Africa. And so you can see that the spread of music from Africa has always played a huge role in mixing it up inside of the world. Of course, in America, it played a role and everywhere else. rhythms heard there are that of the music called Bandari music. Bandari music is a type of music that is popular in Iran and is known pretty far. The reason why this music is important when it comes to the Black Iranians is that the Black Iranians put their little bit of twist in it, especially with the drumming, that made it a very unique style. This unique style then retranslated by adding Indian music, adding Persian music, and adding other Middle Eastern cultures' music inside. The following opinions are from the scholar that I mentioned, Beta, and she will give her opinion about the history of music in Iran that was contributed by Black people. So, according to her, she says, most African Iranians identify as Shia, which is a sign of their cultural assimilation into the larger Iranian society. However, traditional customs and beliefs have also largely permeated this community in Benaz Mirzai's documentary, The Life of African Iranians. Various members of the community on Keshem Island in the Persian Gulf were interviewed to better understand the Tsar religion. The Tsar religion is based on the belief that 72 different types of wind possessed a person. Belief in this religion can also be observed among the natives of Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. She goes further to say there is another ritual close to Tsar called Guati ritual, in which dance has healing powers. Bandari music and southern dance are rooted in a belief that has even influenced the so-called Los Angeles music. Despite the popularity of Bandari music, the role of Afro-Iranians in mainstream media is negligible. The most famous appearance of this group is in the film Basho, The Little Stranger, by Bahram Basil in 1989. The film is about a boy named Bosho who was an orphan in the war and fled the plight of the Iran Iraq War in Kazakhstan to a province in Mazandaran, located in northern Iran. Basho, who has now arrived in Mazandaran in northern Iran, finds himself completely alien in his surroundings, and his adoptive mother buys him some extra soap to better clean his dark complexion. The children of the village bully him because of his skin color, and villagers consider him a bad omen. Beiser openly targets ignorance and racism, which are taboo in popular Iranian culture. These images here depict a story that is almost the same as Journey to the West from China in terms of its oldness and addressing a world. In this story, a fictional Alexander the Great, who is the son of somebody, but we'll talk about that later, goes around the world communicating with people from China, India, and all those places. This story is from the 12th century, and it is great because it comes with some drawings. These drawings give us indicators of what these people thought of the people in the Zanj areas. And yes, most of the people mentioned as Black Africans are mentioned as Zanj. The story not only tells us about stereotypes that existed in the Iranian world, but it also tells us what they thought deeply about the mythology of the areas, with stories about giants, something that we see even in the West. For some reason, giants were associated with Africa, and even some of the stories that we hear about in Europe about giants, even though they've been translated today to be European giants were actually depicting black Africans. Now, of course, you can understand why this would be a pretty bad stereotype because it is trying to put them in a role of savagery, painting them as cannibals, painting them as all of that. But again, this is the reality of how a lot of people in the past interacted with novels or fictional works of Africans. Now, the other thing that happened was that in the Iranian point of view, they had a sophisticated point of view from when it came from Africans because when they compared to other cities around the world, like for example, Rome, which in this story that is depicted over here, the main character goes with his lover to a place called Rome, but then ends up in the Swahili coast. And then, of course, the character asks, if this is Rome, how come you're white and everybody else in this area is black? The fact that, first of all, there's no animation, no movie, no nothing about this particular type of international show is a tragedy to me. It is one of the worst things I've ever heard. Now, I do understand that a lot of the themes in here are somewhat racist, but so are most shows that existed in the past. Although, if we address something before we go to the story, although slavery did exist in Iran, all the way till the 1900s. There has been a cleanup job that has been going for a long time where Iranians have been trying to get rid of their history and say that they never did slavery. Now, the reason why this is happening is because, according to Beta, it does not give a pretty clean culture of Iran, which Iranians like to believe that their culture is pure. And you can't exactly have a pure culture if they were committing slavery to that degree. Luckily, when slavery got banned, the black Africans became free, and the government itself tried to help the black Africans in order to clean up their images or their image. Outside of this small tale, which by the way, I will put in the description so you can read the whole story if you want, we know that black Africans existed inside of Iran as early as the time of Ibn Battuta, as Ibn Battuta writes about a magician. And by the way, he was not writing a fictional novel. He was writing a something he saw, a magician inside of Iran who took a stick and somebody's t-shirt and then did a magic trick, put fire to it, and yet the shirt itself did not burn. This person was a poor person inside of Iran, yet he was a leader of other Iranian people who were of Iranian descent. They weren't black people, but he was the leader of those people. This tells us that there was some kind of way to get out of just being a slave in Iran, even if you were a black person. So this is from Askandar Narma, which is the name of the book. And in this book, it carefully depicts the journey that Alexander took inside the Zang region. Now, I have to state that the Zang will come up over and over again. Zang, obviously, being the area of the Swahili coast. So it says, the fairies promising to give the king an amulet to protect him against them. The Shamalik said to the king, I will come to your presence at noon when the king is alone, for I am afraid my men will recognize the king. King Alexander laughed, and exposing his two horns, which he always kept concealed, said, come openly, for your soldiers will not recognize me. Alexander's arrival in the land of the giants and the cannibal Zangis, and his battle against them. The size of Alexander's army terrified the giants, forcing them to take refuge in a fort. When night came, the giants tried to attack Alexander's camp, but they could not break through the magic circle. Their king, seeking to make peace, sent a messenger and offered to go to Alexander's presence. But Alexander knew that if he spared their lives, they would always be a nuisance to man. Therefore, he killed them all. From there, Alexander set out the land of the fairies. Alexander's arrival at the well, the stories of Maiden, and what occurred between Alexander and the Zangis. Coming upon a well, Alexander's man tried to draw some water, but the rope broke every time they pulled the bucket. A man volunteered to enter the well and see what was wrong. Inside the well, he found a gigantic Zangi, the Zangi servant, and a maiden. There were houses and buildings under the ground, and the Zangi lived there as a king. Alexander slew the Zangi and his servant. The maiden, who was a king's daughter and had been kidnapped by the Zangi, was rescued. An old man had given her an amulet and protected her against the Zangi's advances. Now, again, this story is very stereotypical and it doesn't paint the Zangis in the best light. But, well, it doesn't paint them in the best light in terms of being the heroes, instead, being anti heroes and in some case villains, as we just read. But the interesting part is reading between the lines, where they seem to be very impressed by the civilization that the Zangis have built, where you can see in Wells that they have entire cities. One of the things that's very ironic, or at least very weird in the way they portray these Zangis, is that even though the kidnappings of Black Africans were starting to become at their height at this time, stealing souls and sending them to Iran, sending them to the Middle East, and obviously to Europe and Egypt and North Africa, even though that was happening, for some reason, kidnappings were written the other way, as if Black Africans were taking people from the other parts of the world and then bringing them back to Africa, which was definitely not happening, at least not in the Zanj areas. Now, in other parts of North Africa and West Africa, there were definitely people taking people from those areas and sending them back to their countries. But in the Zanj area, for this to be the stereotype, it's based off of nothing. And you can imagine, of course, how strange it might have been to be a Black African slave reading this type of book where it documents kidnapping as a bad thing, but yet you and your people were kidnapped in order to end up in Iran yourselves. This is an image of a Zang king. The Zanj king, which is a very important one at this moment of the story, he actually captures some people and apparently eats them. That is part of the story that goes on. But not every portrayal of Zanj is negative, as this one actually starts off negative and ends positive, as one of the Zang starts off as a slave and is found singing in the way they say it in a gaiety, meaning he is singing happily, and then all of a sudden he is beaten for no reason by his master. From then on, he goes and asks for forgiveness and actually turns out to be a messenger of God. This messenger of God is given anything that he wants so that he can pass a message from God to Alexander. This part of the story actually starts off in China. So, how Alexander went to the emperor of China as a messenger and what occurred between them. One day, Alexander said to Aristotle, "O sage, We have traveled around the world, visited various lands, and reached the limits of the earth. In all this time, did you ever meet a man wiser and more learned than yourself? I did not, replied Aristotle. The king was displeased with the answer, for it is not proper for a man to praise himself. He asked again, is there anything in the world that is a mystery to you, O king? There is nothing that is hidden from me, Aristotle replied. What if I asked you a question and you failed to answer it? Said the king. In that case, my blood shall be forfeited, replied the sage. I will ask you two questions, said the king. The first shall be about the doctrines of religion. He is king in this world, said Alexander, owns the throne, the crown, the land, the treasury, and the army. What is it that God does not possess, even though he is the King of kings? And tell me also what the God of the world is doing this minute. That which all kings have and God does not have is wife and child and eating and sleeping. That's the answer, by the way, which God needs not. You answered well, said the king. Now tell me what God is doing this minute. O king, give me 7 days to think about this question, Aristotle said. If you do not find the answer within 7 days, will you consider your life forfeited unto me? Asked the king. I will, replied the sage. The king gave him 7 days, but the sage failed to find an answer. He looked into books, he summoned the nobility and the wise men of China, but none of them could answer the question. They said to him, the king is looking for an excuse to spill your blood and appropriate your possessions. For who would ever know what God is doing? They are right, thought the sage. He who serves a king and wins himself a name should be wary against his deceit. It so happened that there was a Zanj, in the house of the sage, in charge of the stove, of the bath. He was some 20 years old and had never in his life possessed a new garment, and had never washed his face. He covered his nakedness with a rag and slept in the warm ashes of the bath's furnace. On the 6th day, Aristotle attendants found the Zang singing and joyful. They beat him, saying, what a time for such gaiety. Weeping, he went to the sage. The sage was downhearted, sitting with his head on his knee. He had given up hope for his life. The Zang complained to the sage that he had been beaten. What was your fault? Asked the sage. I was singing, he replied. Go today, for my heart is troubled. Tomorrow I will put the offender in your hand, said the sage. I want him today, the Zangi insisted. The scholars present shouted at him. Do you not know what has happened? Tell me what it is, he said. I will not leave unless you tell me what has happened. The sage called him to himself and said, the king has asked me what God does in heaven. The Zang said, O master, do you not know what God does in heaven? Is this a mystery to such a learned man as you? I do not know the answer, confessed the sage. I know the answer, said the Zang. Tell us, said the sage. I will give the answer before the king, said the Zang. Then Aristotle went to the king, saying, O king of earth, I have been in your service since the time your mother bore you. Through ignorance, I claimed that I knew all things. The omniscient is God. I claim that I never met anyone more learned than myself. Now I say, I have a black slave, wiser than myself, and he will answer the question posed by the king. Bring him to me, said the king, for I thought this was an unanswerable question. The Zangi was brought in, covering the nakedness with a rag, his feet smeared in dried dung, a month old. The king looked at him and ordered him to give his answer. The Zang said, O king, tell your men to wash me clean and to dress me in your special gown. They did as he asked. They took him to the bath, washed him clean, and dressed him in king's royal gown. Then he said, O king, tell them to bring me aloes wood and rose water, that I may smell good. They did as he asked. Then he said, Give me a house and a horse with its trappings. That's done, he said. I want a beautiful Turkish maiden to be my wife and 10 handsome slaves to serve me. Alexander gave him one of his Chinese maidens presented to him by the Emperor of China and 10 slave boys as beautiful as the moon. Then the Zangi said, Now, O king, what was your question? You asked. The king said, Tell me what God is doing this moment. O king, he said, what God is doing this hour? He brought me from the bath furnace and raised me from that mean state to such honorable position that I may sit in the minister's seat in the presence of the king of the earth. God in this hour is making this take place. When the king heard that from the Zangi, he realized that this was a warning from God, so that it might be known that in 7 spheres and earths an omniscient God is the sole possessor of perfect knowledge. Then the sage said to himself, The king will stay here for 2 or 3 months. He will find excuses to criticize me every day. Therefore, he went home, took 50 dinars, and sent the money to Alexander. Later, he went to Alexander himself and kissed the ground before him. The king did not accept the sum. I do not keep you for gold or silver, he said. You should be wiser than to think so, for all my treasure house is yours. Aristotle bowed before the king. From this point on, the story goes in a different direction and starts to address a completely different topic, which is women. And by the way, if you think that this book is only racist, uh, think again. It has good features of sexism, and it tells men that if you follow women, then you are, firstly, it says no wiser than they are, and then it has different types of themes about why women should bow down to men. But that is the general sightings of Zhang. Now you're probably thinking, oh yeah, that's probably the 2 small pieces over here that include Zhang. From this page onwards, up until about page 140, there is mention of Zhang all over. So this book itself talks about Zhang in several ways as cannibals, kings, saviors, like in this case, like I mentioned, anti heroes, female characters. Now you must remember again with Iran, it gets a little more complicated in history because at some point, somewhere in the 1700s, the word black became associated with the word slave, and black slaves were still shipped to Iran even in the 1900s. And for some reason, they valued the females way more than they valued the men, which is why the females outnumbered the men, usually to fill their harems. In the modern world, as we remember, there were Iranians that were taken from Africa and then raised in those regions from rich societies. And one of the populations or one of the cities is Bandar Abbas. Bandar Abbas is a city in Iran with about 500,000 people. This city has a large number of Afro Iranians. Now, you must remember, Afro Iranian doesn't mean they're coming from Africa specifically. It's the same as African American. They've been there for hundreds of years, and for some people, thousands of years. The thing that's always surprising when you look into Iran is that there's actually a smaller population of Indians in Iran than of black Africans. Yet a lot of people associate Persia and Iran with India rather than Africa, which again, they used to be partners in a way. So obviously they used to be enemies because you can see in some cases that there's pure enemy type stuff, but they also were partners in a sense. And because they were united under Islam, they operated as a giant unit. Let's finish off with this word Zanj. It's a very curious one because the first time you hear it from Arab scholars is about 700 AD. It's interesting because before this, you hear nothing of this word, except for the Romans, who used the word Azania in East Africa. If you look at specific places, maybe Wikipedia, maybe other places, they will suggest that this word is Chinese. Now, given some of the way that it's written and the way that it looks, I can understand why they would say that. Zingi does come across as a Chinese word. But in real life, it seems like nobody knows exactly where this word comes from. Some people suggest that it is Persian in origin. Now, wherever this word comes from, and wherever it seems to have derived and spread, it seems to have carried a lot of weight with it, as you can see in this story. The word Zhang is not equivalent to the word slave, which is weird because most words eventually did have that connotation. It seems to be a high powered word, and to some degree, although it means black, it seems to have been blacks with civilization, not just any type of Zhang, because a lot of the non Zhang people were called other words by these very same people. Just like the word raptor meant a specific civilization within East Africa. Who knows exactly where this word came from? It might even be a local word that was Span, but it tells us that these people have had contact with people as far as China since the Romans met them in the early first century. The stories told, the clothes they wore, their sophisticated civilizations, their ability to play a role in all these tales and histories from around the world, the dances they bring, and the people they bring together and still to this day hold on as far as the world can see. These are the Zanj, but they do not fully encompass every type of African around the world. For remember, Zar, which is in Iran, is not that of a Zanj. It is Ethiopian in origin. Ethiopians seem to have played a role in it themselves. Zanj play a different role inside of that area themselves. The story barely mentions Ethiopians, and they barely mention other places of Africa except the Zanj coasts. Thank you for watching. We will talk about further connections between Persia and Africa another time. But for now, thank you very much. Like, share, subscribe, donate, super chat, become a member, whatever. Thank you very much.